Hello, I'm Corey Knight with Draper Incorporated. I am a project manager and AVMS product coordinator here at Draper. And today we're here to talk about SmartTrim. Sometimes when working with SmartTrim and trying to figure out how you're installing a Barco Unicy wall and utilizing either our Draper mount interface and our SmartTrim, the difficulty comes in line with how do I determine my offset, how do I determine the depth of my trim flange, and it's difficult sometimes when you don't know what those parts and pieces are. So to help illustrate that today, I've brought along our Draper mount interface, a piece of that Draper mount interface, as well as a Unicy wall cross that is used with the Barco Unicy display. The difficulty in determining the rear flange on our SmartTrim is because of the play that you have in the Unicy wall cross. This Unicy wall cross is threaded onto an M10 bolt, which is part of our DMI that's shown here, but it could also be an installation that is utilizing either Unistrut or could be plywood of some kind or some type of offset behind the Unicy wall cross, the Unicy display as you work back towards the wall. And sometimes if you're not careful, you may not take into account the fact that this Unicy wall cross can adjust on the Z-axis, which could cause interference issues with your side trim. And so today I'd like to walk you through some of the tools that we have here at Draper on our website, as well as just walking through the trim pieces to hopefully answer some of those difficult questions in trying to determine what your trim depth should be. So to take a look at what the Unicy SmartTrim is, I brought a piece along today. This piece of trim would be an intermediate bottom piece of trim. As you can see, it doesn't have angled or beveled corner or mitered corner. This is an intermediate centerpiece, typical of what you would see on either a 3x3 Unicy array or something larger in that size. This is a bottom piece. The way that we can tell that this is a bottom piece is that the rear flange portion, which is this section right here, is vented. The venting allows for airflow, so that way your Unicy wall can have the proper airflow for cooling. When referring to SmartTrim, there are two key pieces in identifying your SmartTrim: the face piece, or the face trim, and the rear flange. When determining what this rear flange depth should be, this is the piece that gets adjusted in depth. So when talking about offsets and when talking about how deep or how large should my trim be, the face trim always remains the same, it's a constant, but the rear flange can grow up to 1/4 inch increments, up to 4.25 inches, that's the max trim depth, or 4.75 inches, that's the trim depth. But those 1/4 inch measurements can be added to the rear flange in order to account for any offset that you might have. So those are the pieces and parts that we'll be talking about today, and what I'll do now is I'll go to our spec sheet in order to discuss some of the pinch points and some of the things to be aware of and how to figure out what should this trim depth be. Standardly, it's 2.75 inches. It can grow, as you know, by 1/4 inch measurements, and we'll look at the spec sheet to determine some of those questions and answers today. To start off, I'll take you to our webpage at draperinc.com, and it should pull up this top page here that you're seeing on your screen. You'll go to the audio-visual tab. You'll see the different product categories that we offer, and over here on the right-hand side, under Mounts and Structures for Displays, you'll want to jump to Draper SmartTrim. It'll pull up our SmartTrim page. In order to locate the spec sheet that we're talking about today, it's under Technical Documents. You can see the installation instructions, and just below that is the SmartTrim for Barco Unicy Interactive Planning Sheet. Now that we're in our SmartTrim for Barco Unicy spec sheet, we can scroll down to our interactive spreadsheet that we can go through and determine the different wall sizes of our Unicy SmartTrim. So the first thing that we'll want to do is just to indicate what size wall it is. So that way when you send this in to your inside sales rep, they'll be able to determine what size Unicy array and SmartTrim you'll be needing. So for this instance, we'll utilize a 3x3. One of the main hiccups when determining what your rear trim flange needs to be is the fact of installation. Installation will play a big part into determining what your rear flange should be for your Unici SmartTrim kit. As you can see on our spec form, there are a couple of different options that you can select to let us know how you'll be installing your Barco Unici wall. For direct wall mount, this is where your Unici wall is going to be flush with the finished wall, and you will not need anything other than our standard SmartTrim. By selecting this option, you'll be getting the standard SmartTrim kit with the standard 2.75-inch rear flange. That rear flange will then allow your wall to be offset or to be gapped by 0.25 inches away from the back edge of the trim and the surface of the wall. The next option that you'll see is offset mounting. Offset mounting, as we said earlier on, could be a number of different applications. You could be offsetting to a wall that has a 0.75 or 3/4 inch plywood backer. There are other plywood backers that are out there, but in this case, your entire Unici wall would be pushed out away from the actual wall by 0.75 inches. The third option is mounting to 1.63 Unistrut. Again, this is over the top of a finished wall. Then you have your 1.63 Unistrut, which would essentially push away your face of the display by that same amount. Then the final option, if you're not mounting to a 1.63 Unistrut or 0.75 inch plywood backer, you can select this offset. And this section here is where a lot of folks have a difficult time in determining what the offset is. And one of the main reasons why this is such an important section to fill out and understand is because of the Unici wall cross and the fact that it has Z-axis adjustment. To show you that adjustment, I have this illustration of our DMI mount, as you can see here, the M10 bolt that's here, and the Barco Unici wall cross. The M10 bolt length from the face of the back jam nut and the tip of the M10 bolt is 2.10 inches. But as you can see, if I move my screen over here, is that not only can that wall cross be threaded all the way in on that Z-axis, but it can also be adjusted out. When utilizing a surface mount or our draper mount interface, the need for an extended rear trim flange is not necessary. Our installation instructions for our draper mount interface, or DMI, show installation with the Unici wall cross threaded all the way in. However, if you're offset mounting, you'll want to be aware that there is adjustment within the Unici wall cross that could allow you to do the same thing. So if you're mounting to a plywood backer of 0.75 inches and your installer is intending to thread in on the Z-axis of the Unici wall cross by 1/2 inch or that same amount, then you may not need an extended flange at all. However, if their intent is to not adjust for any of the offset for whatever reason, then you'll want to, up to the nearest 1/4 inch, add to that rear flange, so that way your rear flange will cover anything that is behind your Unici display. To illustrate that, or to see it with a little bit more detail, with both the DMI and or wall reference, SmartTrim, and Unici wall cross, here is an example of what our DMI, M10 bolt, Unici wall cross, and SmartTrim is on one drawing, so that way you can see it. As you can see on the picture, we have the standard rear flange of 2.75 inches and our face trim, which bevels towards the face of the display. The front leading edge of our trim would be at the same plane as the Unici display, the face of the Unici display, for a total depth from your finished wall of 6.781 inches. Again, there may be a need to adjust out on the Z-axis, and this is the reason for an offset mount or a longer trim flange. To go back to our spec sheet, let's take a look at that again. So in this application, offsetting to a wall by 0.75 inches, if your Unistrut wall is going to be pushed away from the actual finished wall by that amount, then you'll want to add to your rear flange 0.75 inches. By doing so, it will grow your rear flange out to 3.5 inches and ultimately give you a rear flange that is then 1/4 inch away from the wall. However, you must ensure that during install, your installer doesn't thread in the Unistrut wall cross to account for any of this offset. If so, it could create an interference issue. By carefully paying attention to these dimensions and also relaying that same information to your installer, you can successfully spec the SmartTrim and also ensure a proper installation. However, if you are installing and accounting for any of that 0.75 offset, then just simply deduct that amount from your offset and then indicate how deep of a trim you need to the nearest 1/4 inch. The largest trim that we can supply, rear flange trim that we can supply, is 4.75 inches, all the way down to the standard 2.75 inches. The next option on our spec sheet is sectional trim. This is just simply determining that each individual piece will be per display. So for every display that you have a piece of trim that correlates with it. We have different color options. The standard is black textured. We also have white available, and other finishes are available upon request. In this section here, specifying the SmartTrim panel ventilation, this is to allow for any airflow requirements for installations on recesses or larger walls where additional airflow may be required. This is the area in which you'll want to indicate those factors. For recessed installations, for recessed areas, face trim venting is available. On standard applications up to 3x3, the top rear flange is left off. It can also be added and vented if required. Side venting for the rear flange can also be done, and standard venting along the bottom rear flange is available. But as you can see, venting options can be selected upon request if unique applications require special venting. And this can be done at no additional charge. And this has been a quick look at our Draper SmartTrim spec sheet. Hopefully these tips have been helpful in order to identify how to adjust your trim depth and some of the pinch points when it comes to figuring out your SmartTrim for your Barco Unistrut wall. Just because we went through the spec sheet and given you this video doesn't mean that you're on your own. Please, if you have comments or questions and need help from Draper, give us a call. It's 800-238-7999 and just ask for technical support. We hope that this has been helpful and we hope you have a good day.